Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today's webinar is the fourth in our series of clinical trial webinars, and of course, we're happy to have you joining us today. As you know, there are many clinical trials currently enrolling PWS patients for their studies. Some of these trials are investigational drugs, others are behavioral interventions. An overview of PWS clinical trials are available on fpwr.org, and I encourage you to visit the site to learn more about the opportunities that are available. We are so fortunate to have these trial opportunities available to us. This year alone, we will require more than 500 participants to fill these clinical trials. I know you're joining us today because you want treatments for your loved ones, and these trials are the first step. It will require the entire effort of the PWS community to help complete these trials, and I encourage all of you to learn more about these opportunities, discuss them with your physicians, and determine if an opportunity may be right for you and your loved one with PWS. Today's guest presenters are joining us from Millendo Therapeutics and will be sharing more information with you regarding their study of Livoletide. We'll be collecting questions from the audience throughout the webinar, and we'll answer all of your questions after their short presentation. Without further delay, I give you Julia Owens, the CEO of Millendo Therapeutics.
Hi, I am Julia Owens, the CEO of Millendo Therapeutics, and I'd like to thank the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research for this great opportunity to present the ZEPHYR study on Livoletide for the treatment of hyperphagia in Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm joined today by a number of my colleagues that you'll hear from, including Mike Yeh, VP of Medical Affairs, Soraya Alas, our VP of Clinical Development, and Ryan Zadan, our Senior Vice President of Development. I will be making a few forward-looking statements in this presentation based on our management team's current beliefs, but of course things can change and may not work out. So this brief slide is just to remind you that we may not be specifically updating you on these changes, and the best way to keep up to date is to look at Millendo's website or our most recent filings with the SEC. But moving on from those legal disclosures, slide 3 here shows a picture of our team at Millendo. We're a small, fun group of 35 individuals working at a biotech in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, we've actually embedded a picture of Michigan Stadium, or the Big House, which is right down the road from us in Ann Arbor, because Millendo really came out of work done at the University of Michigan. In fact, the legendary football coach, Bo Schembechler, became involved in rare endocrine diseases, and specifically adrenal cancer, because his wife Millie died of that horrible disease. He raised money to fund research in rare endocrine diseases at the University of Michigan, and out of this research, Millendo became who we are 7 years ago now. So the name of the company, Millendo, comes from the combination of Millie and endocrine disease being our primary focus. Here we've shown a slide of Millendo's pipeline, and today we're going to spend almost all of our time talking about Prader-Willi syndrome and our development of Livoletide in that indication. But you should also know that Millendo is seeking to develop treatments for other rare endocrine diseases, such as congenital adrenal hyperplasia and endogenous Cushing's syndrome. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Mike Yeh now, our head of medical affairs, to talk more about Livoletide and in particular the ZEPHYR trial. Mike?
Thank you, Julia. Let's start by talking about why we think Livoletide might work for hyperphagia and Prader-Willi syndrome. So your stomach produces a hormone called acylated ghrelin, or AG, which causes your brain to think that you're hungry. Some of you may have heard of this referred to as simply ghrelin. We know that AG is the most potent appetite-stimulating hormone produced outside the brain. We also know that it stimulates fat deposition and induces insulin resistance, which means that your body doesn't respond as well to insulin as it should. In contrast, your body also makes unacylated ghrelin, shown here in the middle, or UAG. UAG seems to have the opposite effects of acylated ghrelin in some very important ways. UAG inhibits AG-induced food intake, inhibits fat deposition, and improves insulin sensitivity. We also know that UAG levels are relatively low in people with PWS who are experiencing hyperphagia, especially when compared with AG levels. So we've invented Livoletide, which takes a portion of the UAG molecule and puts it into a ring so that it lasts longer in the human body. Livoletide is injected once daily using a small volume syringe with a short ultrafine needle. We believe that Livoletide can replace the deficiency in UAG that we see in people with PWS, and that this can help reduce hyperphagia. And we've already tested Livoletide in the largest phase 2 study done to date in PWS. Next slide, please. Here we see the key results of our phase 2 clinical trial in PWS, which was published last year. What is shown on the slide are average changes in the degree of hyperphagia as measured by the hyperphagia questionnaire. The lower the bar below 0, the more improvement there is. The bars show the average degree of change in HQ score over 2 weeks in the group that received placebo in gray and Livoletide in orange. Placebo looks like study drug, but has no active ingredients. Across all 3 graphs, you see that the Livoletide groups show more improvement over 2 weeks than the placebo. When you only include subjects living at home, shown in the middle, you see an even greater degree of difference. And when you take participants living at home who have a high degree of hyperphagia at the start, shown on the right-hand side, you'll see that the differences are even greater. So we have evidence that Livoletide reduced hyperphagia in a robust clinical trial. Next slide, please. Let's talk about Livoletide safety. So Livoletide has been well tolerated in human clinical trials to date across 100 plus human subjects. The phase 2A study showed no serious adverse effects or discontinuations due to adverse events. There were also no clinically significant findings with respect to vital signs, physical exam, or safety labs. Injection site reactions were the most frequent adverse events in this trial and were more frequently observed in the placebo group than in the Livoletide group. In non-clinical studies, Livoletide has had a favorable safety profile in studies up to 9 months long and at doses about 100 times human clinical doses. Next slide, please. These encouraging efficacy and safety data led us to design the ZEPHYR study, which is underway now. Next slide. What is the ZEPHYR study? The ZEPHYR study is a large, long-term clinical research study for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. The study is designed to answer the following questions. What are the effects of Livoletide on hyperphagia and food-related behaviors in people with PWS? And what are its effects on body weight, waist circumference, and fat mass? How safe and well tolerated is Livoletide? Study participation involves up to 14 months to complete the study, up to 9 clinic visits and a phone call, and injections with a short ultrafine needle into the abdomen once daily. 150 people with PWS will be enrolled. Once we reach 150 participants, the study will be closed. Next slide, please. Who can participate? We've tried to make the criteria to enter the study as broad as possible. The main inclusion criteria include ages 8 through 65, diagnosis of PWS confirmed by DNA methylation test, evidence of increased appetite or hyperphagia. The person with PWS has to have a consistent primary caregiver who will be able to evaluate the participant and perform study-related activities throughout the study. The BMI for adults has to be less than 65. Growth hormone treatment is permitted if doses have been stable for at least a month. And diabetes medications, including insulin, are also permitted if doses have been stable for about 3 months. The main exclusion criteria include history of chronic liver disease, type 1 diabetes, a hemoglobin A1C greater than 10%. So people with normal BMI or with type 2 diabetes are fine to participate. Next slide, please. What can ZEPHYR participants expect? The ZEPHYR study is actually broken up into 4 parts. The first is screening, which takes 2 to 4 weeks and has 1 clinic visit. In the screening portion, study participants will undergo some assessments to confirm they can participate in the trial. In the core period, which lasts 3 months and has 4 visits, participants will be randomized to either a low or high dose of Livoletide or to placebo. So you'll have a 2 out of 3 chance of receiving Livoletide. In the extension period, which lasts 9 months and has 4 visits, everyone will receive Livoletide, even if they started on placebo. Finally, there's a phone call 1 month after the extension period is over. It's important that during the trial, a consistent caregiver is available to answer questionnaires at each visit. In addition to physical exam, most visits will require fasting blood work followed by breakfast. Some visits will require an ECG and a DEXA scan. An ECG is a non-invasive test of the electrical activity of the heart, and a DEXA scan is a special X-ray that measures the bone, fat, and muscle composition of the body. Next slide, please. There's no guarantee that being in the ZEPHYR study will help be effective in treating hyperphagia. But what we learn from the study may help treat others in the future. A comprehensive list of potential risks of the study procedures and the investigation medication is included in the study consent form, and it will not affect your medical care if you decide not to participate. Next slide, please. We understand that it's a tremendous commitment for you to participate in a clinical trial. To try to make things as easy as we can, we'll be working with Scout Clinical Services to offer a full range of trial participant and family assistance services. So these include flight and rail travel arrangements, ground transportation, and hotel accommodations. For out-of-pocket expenses like food or parking, Scout offers debit cards or quick reimbursement. Scout also offers 24/7 travel assistance. We expect to have about 15 sites in the United States, and we'll also have sites in 6 countries in Europe. On this slide, we list the sites that are recruiting in California, Minnesota, and Tennessee. We also list the sites that are opening to recruitment soon in Alabama, Kansas, and Washington. Finally, on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the sites are expected to be open soon. We are working to have these sites open as soon as possible. Not all of our expected sites are listed, so for the latest information, please visit our website at www.millendo.com or look us up on clinicaltrials.gov. Next slide, please. We're now open to answer any questions you might have about the trial. I'll hand it back to Susan to moderate.
We do have a few questions in the queue, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. Question number 1. What are the common side effects we might experience during trial participation?
Thanks, Susan. The most common side effects that have been related, that we've seen to date have been related to local reactions at the injection site of both Livoletide and placebo. The rate and severity of the injection site reactions have been similar in the Livoletide and placebo groups so far and did not lead to anyone stopping treatment. There have also been some reports of GI side effects like diarrhea in the Livoletide group. Overall, Livoletide, though, has been really well tolerated in our clinical studies to date.
Why do you think this drug will help with hyperphagia?
So Livoletide acts similarly to a hormone found naturally in the body called unacylated ghrelin, or UAG. We know that people with PWS who are hyperphagic have a steep drop in their levels of UAG relative to their levels of acylated ghrelin, or AG. And we also know that AG causes feelings of hunger and that UAG is known to inhibit the hunger caused by AG. So we believe that Livoletide actually can replace the deficiency in UAG that we see in people with PWS, and that this can help with hyperphagia.
Can a person travel with this medication? Does it require refrigeration or special storage?
So yes, you definitely can travel with Livoletide, but it needs to be kept cold. So it needs to be on ice in an insulated bag with ice packs to keep it at cooler temperatures. Once you arrive at your destination, you should just store it in the refrigerator. And as part of the study, we'll supply you with everything you need to travel with Livoletide, such as cooler bags and ice packs. And if you need to fly with Livoletide, we can also provide you with a note for airport security to allow you to bring Livoletide on ice on board the airplane. It's also important to protect Livoletide from extremes in temperature as much as possible. So Livoletide should not be frozen, and you shouldn't leave it in a hot car or sitting in direct sunlight.
Most of us are familiar with growth hormone. Will this injection be available in a pen device similar to that?
We are at the start of the trial, no, but we are actually actively working on developing a pen for this at this point.
So this question, my loved one is not overweight. Can he participate?
Yes, we realize that about a third of people with PWS are not overweight. So your loved one with PWS could still be eligible even if they're not overweight. It really depends upon the degree of hyperphagia.
So if a child does not steal food and even leaves food on his plate, is he or she eligible?
Well, yeah, as we know, hyperphagia can be expressed in many different ways. Just because a person with PWS doesn't exhibit some specific behaviors doesn't mean that they're not eligible for our study. And so the best way to tell if your child is eligible for a clinical trial is to just contact your local site to be evaluated.
Great. Our next set of questions is around the caregiver requirement. If a person is currently living at home, but the parents would like to put this child or an adult into a group home later in the fall, would that preclude eligibility, or could placement change during the course of the study?
I'm going to hand this off to Ryan Zaidan to see if you'd like to answer this one. You know, let me actually take a quick stab at that one, because I think that there is a requirement that during the trial that we try to keep a consistent caregiver evaluating the patient during the course, certainly during the course of the core period. So if there is going to be a transition, they may not be able to satisfy that condition and may not be eligible for the trial.
All right. Another caregiver question: If the patient is already in a group home, can they participate?
Yeah, there'll be certain requirements we'll need to meet relating to their setting of where they're being seen, the caregiver having consistent interactions with the patient, and these will be gone over with your physician at the time of your study visit to get into the details. It will really vary on a case-by-case basis, but it is not preferred that a patient is in a group home setting.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if a patient is in a group home setting and the parent is interested in participating, they should contact their nearest study site to review with the study coordinator and determine if it's the right fit for them.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Would you consider adults with PWS if they live independently? So if they're not living at home?
It's important for the patient to have a caregiver that's interacting with them on a daily basis. So it would really depend on how the setting is and who they're interacting and whose care they're under. And that would need to be discussed with the physician to assess eligibility for the study.
Yeah, I'm going to also say here, Susan, that the advice that you gave around just going to the local clinical trial site and having them evaluate the patient and take a look at it on a case-by-case basis is probably the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, some of these situations are certainly unique and individual, and it sounds like you would want people to go to their coordinator so that they could ask that individual question and get a response that's specific to their situation.
Precisely. I think that I would hate for someone to automatically think the answer is no, and then lose out on the chance to participate.
So who can deliver the injection or actually give the injection at night? Does that need to be the same caregiver, or does it need to be assigned to a specific person?
Doesn't need to be assigned to a specific person. It could be it could be given by the same person, could be given by different people. The procedure for drawing up and administering the drug will be taught at one of the visits. It's fairly simple as far as these kinds of procedures go, although obviously if you're new to this, sometimes it can be a little daunting at first.
I'm going to take us back to the list of sites, because some sites are open, some are opening soon, and some are expected to open sometime in the future. Patients or our participants here, they want to know, when is their specific site opening up? how can they best stay in the know to have that information?
Ryan, do you want to answer?
Sure, Mike. So there's various processes that are happening at each of these sites that define the timing of when they'll be open. The best way to have the most up-to-date information about the status of each site is to check clinicaltrials.gov. We update it on a daily basis, and as sites start to recruit, it is reflected there. So that is your best source of information.
One other thing, Susan, I just want to stress the fact that we are a small company. We're not some large behemoth, and we're not at all impersonal. So if you go to that last slide, you'll see an email address for Robin Schmidt in the U.S. and Nadej Tremel in Europe, and you'll also see their phone numbers as well too. Go ahead and give a call. Go ahead and drop us a line, and we'll take care of you. We're small and we're personal.
Great. You know, I absolutely would take them up on this offer. If you have questions specific to this your unique child, give them a call, ask them the questions. FPWR, we'll do our best to get this information out through our email alerts as well as Facebook. But parents can take the reins here and certainly reach directly out to the company and ask questions as well. We have a question regarding the extension period. So you mentioned in the placebo-controlled period, 1/3 of patients will be on placebo, 1/3 will be on one dose, and another third will be on a higher dose. When we go to the extension period, who gets what dose? How does that work?
Soraya, would you like to answer this one?
Yes, sure. So people who were on one dose will continue on the same one, and people who were on placebo will be split on each of the 2 doses. So everyone will get Livoletide during the extension period, low dose or high dose.
And that would be, would that be assigned randomly, or does a person get to pick?
No, it will be assigned actually at the beginning of the study already.
And it is assigned randomly.
Yes, thank you. So there's a question regarding Scout. I'd like to go back to that slide here. You talked about services that Scouts provide. Could you clarify, is transportation and hotels paid for through the study?
Yes, yes. So Scout will go ahead and will arrange and will pay for in advance air and rail travel, as well as hotels and ground transportation. They'll arrange cars to get people to and from the hotel to the study site, and that's all paid for ahead of time. If you want to be reimbursed for that, you could do that. That's actually okay. But for most people, it's easier to have Scout just pay for everything ahead.
Sounds like you're really making it easy for folks.
Like I said, it's a big commitment on your part to participate in a clinical trial, and so we think we need to do our part to make it easy for you.
Right. So you have a lower age limit of 8. Why 8 years old? And could you consider taking on patients that are perhaps under the age of 8?
Soraya, I'm going to hand this one over to you.
Okay, so the study currently is open for age of 8, as hyperphagia actually is prevalent at this age, especially hyperphagia with significant behaviors. We are also considering in the very near future to open a clinical trial for younger patients, down to the age of 4, actually. That's going to be done as a second step.
So in this study, the age limit is 8, but in the future, we can expect to see another study where the age limit will be lower.
That could be part of this study as well, like an extension of this study.
I would add that these are still under negotiation and discussion with all the local health authorities, and something that we're working out with them, what's the best strategy and approach to addressing other parts of the PWS community.
Right. Is there a safety record with this type of molecule?
Sure. We have tested the Livoletide in a phase 1 program. So it means in healthy volunteers, in subjects with obesity, and also in patients with type 2 diabetes. So we have a history of safety up to 2 weeks of treatment with Livoletide. In addition to that, we have tested, as you know, Livoletide in PWS studies. So we have also safety history with PWS patients. As Mike mentioned at the beginning, the most common adverse events that were seen across phase 1 program and phase 2A, which was the study in PWS, was injection site reactions.
Yeah, and I think one other thing just to add on, it's on the slide there, that is of note, is we have tested this at levels up to 100 times what's seen in human clinical doses, and we've not seen any any effects.
In animals, Mike, just to
in animals. Sorry, let me add that on, in animals. Thank you, Ryan.
We have a few questions regarding eligibility criteria. So we know that this study is looking to evaluate the effects of Livoletide on hyperphagia. So that someone would need to have measurable hyperphagia to participate, but how severe does it need to be is the question.
Yeah, I think once again, I'm going to say, and this is going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but the best way to actually really tell is to actually go to your local site to have them evaluate your loved one for hyperphagia. There's a hyperphagia questionnaire that has 9 questions on it and has a certain that cover different aspects of hyperphagia, as well as some of the behaviors associated with that. And you really need to take a look at that to really kind of understand, whether or not your child is whether or not your loved one is going to be eligible.
I did put the eligibility slide back up because we have some questions regarding medication. So specifically, can the person with PWS be using other medications? And the examples given are Concerta and oxytocin.
In general, any medication should be stable for at least 3 months before entering the study. We are not excluding people on oxytocin.
Yeah. So I think, Susan, also to generalize a little bit, basically medications for psychological or behavioral issues are actually okay as long as the doses have been stable for 3 months. Same thing goes with medications for diabetes, growth hormone, 1 month.
Would a participant be excluded if they have had some form of bariatric surgery?
No, this is not part of exclusion criteria.
Yeah, so that should be okay.
That should be okay, right?
All right, so back to our list of sites. Some sites are open now, some sites are preparing to open in the very near future. Others we're not sure about. Can a participant enroll in a site that's open now and then transfer to a closer site once it has opened?
Ryan or Soraya, do you have an opinion on that?
I think the logistics of that would have to be discussed with the physician. There, may be some logistical barriers to doing that. The best thing to do is contact your physician at the site that's most near to you and discuss that.
Great, thank you so much. So I'd like to thank the team from Millendo Therapeutics for joining us today and answering questions from our community members. I think a big message that was given today was, if in doubt, contact your study coordinator that's nearest you, or contact Millendo directly. They're happy to answer any questions you may have. You should also discuss this with your physician or your local endocrinologist to make sure that participating is right for you and your family. If you are interested in learning more about this clinical trial or others, you will find a directory of clinical trials on the SPWR website at spwr.org. This includes contact information for each trial site. You can also reach out again to the site nearest you, or go to clinicaltrials.gov for the latest clinical trial information. These are all great resources for you to have. We invite you to join us for future clinical trial webinars. Our next webinar will be May 6th, and we'll be sharing information about the mindfulness intervention study. This is a study aiming to improve temper outbursts using mindfulness techniques. The study is open to participants between the ages of 13 and 30 and is remote, so it will not require travel. Thank you again for joining us today. Please continue to spread the word about these trial opportunities so we can continue to enroll them as quickly as possible. Have a great day, everyone.